Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Foster, and I'm an evening anchor here in Washington, D.C. at WUSA 9. And I'm really thrilled to be here to host for you this webinar called The Global Impact of Sickle Cell Disease. Who's at risk? How's it managed? And what's next? So this webinar is being brought to you by the Rare Disease Diversity Coalition. And it's a coalition that was formed to address the extraordinary challenges faced by rare disease patients of color. The coalition brings together rare disease experts, health and diversity advocates, and of course, industry leaders to identify and advocate for evidence-based solutions to alleviate the disproportionate burden of rare diseases on communities of color. So today's webinar is going to feature a panel of healthcare experts, of rare disease warriors, and caregivers who will address very important issues around sickle cell worldwide, including risk management, patient care, and emerging treatments. This virtual seminar is being held to commemorate World Sickle Cell Day, which is coming up this Sunday, June 19th. I have the pleasure now to introduce our very first speaker, Dr. Marjorie DeJoy Brewer. Her name literally means joy, and she's going to bring some joy today when she delivers her presentation on the topic of sickle cell disease. She'll be talking more about the history, the impact, and the future. And Dr. Brewer is the Medical Director for Global Medical Affairs at Vertex Pharmaceuticals Incorporated. So please now welcome Dr. Brewer.
Hello, Leslie. How are you? So glad to be here.
So great to have you, and really excited to hear what you have to share with all of us today.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So happy to be here with everyone, and happy to have an opportunity to present some of this important information and be part of the charge that this coalition has taken. And I'm a firm believer in awareness and education, and that with education, we are empowered, and that with empowerment, we can make positive change. So with that, I'm going to go into presenting and giving you a little bit of the background of sickle cell disease, talk about the impact of sickle cell disease globally, reference screening and early interventions, it's a manageable disease, and the current and future treatments. I touch on that. So I'm going to start here with sickle cell trait and malaria, a conversation that many people often start with, and I'm hoping to share some information with all of you, maybe remind some of you of some things, and enlighten you on some other things you might not know. So the sickle mutation is a common in many malaria-prone parts of the world. And the parasite that's the cause for malaria, Plasmodium, cannot be digested by the sickle hemoglobin. So as it stands, the normal pathway of malaria parasites usually invade normal red blood cells and rearrange their content. The parasites breed and produce proteins that make red blood cells sticky. These blood cells explode, releasing parasites capable of infecting other red blood cells. That's the normal pathway, usually. But when with the hemoglobin, SC affects the parasite's ability to complete that life cycle. So the parasite triggers the sickle cell hemoglobin to sickle, then the immune system clears the infected red blood cells before the parasite can complete its life cycle and then infect other red blood cells. So this means fewer parasites, a milder illness, and basically a survival advantage for those with this hemoglobin. Going into a little bit of the inheritance pattern of sickle cell disease in this graph called the Punnett square. So people inherit one sickle cell gene and one normal gene have what we call the sickle cell trait. And what has been known historically or been said historically is that people with sickle cell trait usually do not have any symptoms of sickle cell disease. But here's the beauty of new science, and as science changes and evolves, and as we all educate together, we are now learning that there are some differences depending on what other medical conditions you present with or your history that changes sometimes the clinical presentation of sickle cell disease. But overall, or sickle cell trait, but overall, most individuals that just have the trait do not express symptoms, but they can pass that trait on to their children. And what this graph shows and represents is if there are two parents each with the trait, that out of every 4 births, there's a 1 in 4 chance that there'll be a child affected with sickle cell disease. There's a 1 in 4 chance that there'll be a child completely uninfected. And there's a 2 in 4 chance, 50%, that there will be 2 children or children as carriers. And what I want to emphasize is that this probability, the 1 in 4, the 1 in 4, and the 2 in 4, happens for every single pregnancy. So what's sickle cell disease? Very simply put, and I like to stick to some basics because that's where we build from. Sickle cell disease is an inherited blood disorder that affects the red blood cells. As you can see, the donut shape, soft shape by the first and top image. And then sickle cell disease causes red blood cells to form into a crescent or also a sickled shape. 2 of the words that we use to describe the form and the shape, which is the second, which is a much more brittle, where the top one is softer and passes through the red blood cells very easily. The second image represents the more sickled shape, which is stickier, fragile, and stiffer. And that overall, in this disease process, what you see is a clumping together, a term that we often use, that blocks the blood flow, which causes a range of serious health issues. Some of those health issues are seen in some of the hallmark complications of sickle cell disease, where we see hemolytic anemia, acute vaso-occlusive pain, chronic and organ damage, acute chest syndrome, and stroke. These are some of the most common complications that we see in sickle cell disease, but there are many, many more. And the current approaches to sickle cell disease, which has vastly increased over the past 5 years, are mostly disease-modifying therapeutics. And for the acute setting, it's mostly hydration and pain management at the moment. So sickle cell disease as a multi-system condition. Whenever I talk about this disease process, I usually tell individuals anywhere that a sickle cell can go, a cell can go, a red blood cell can go, or a sickle cell can go, can be affected by the sickle cell disease. And I think this is really well represented in this image with all the boxes of potential complications and developments as a result of sickle cell disease. So it's been over 100 years since sickle cell disease was first described by James B. Herrick. Sickle cell disease, which causes a wide range of severe and even life-threatening consequences, is caused by a single misspelling in the DNA instructions that form hemoglobin. And hemoglobin itself, its primary job is carrying oxygen throughout the body in the blood. As a result of this mutation, individuals with sickle cell disease experience many things, including lifelong complications, anemia, infections, stroke, which I mentioned before as one of the hallmarks, tissue damage, organ failure, intense painful episodes, and premature death. The burden from sickle cell disease can be very great, and these debilitating symptoms and the complex treatment needs for sickle cell patients living with sickle cell disease often limit their quality of life. It's a multi-system disease, as I said before, associated with episodes of acute illness and progressive organ damage, and one of the most common monogenic disorders worldwide, affecting an estimated 30 million people. It's really, really ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Sickle cell disease represents a major public health problem because of its associated morbidity and mortality. When you look at the global impact of sickle cell disease, it's estimated that each year, over 300,000 babies with severe forms of sickle cell disease. And as Vertexians, we always say that every form of sickle cell disease is a severe form. And these diseases are born worldwide, and the majority in low to middle income countries. Sickle cell disease affects millions of people throughout the world, and is particularly common among those whose ancestors come from sub-Saharan Africa, Spanish-speaking regions in the Western Hemisphere, such as South America, the Caribbean, and Central America, Saudi Arabia, India, and Mediterranean countries such as Turkey, Greece, and Italy. By 2050, the number of people with sickle cell is expected to increase by 30%. Survival for sickle cell disease in some middle-income countries are making huge advancements. And it's really positive to see this shift in survival. Through newborn screening and early therapeutic interventions, a child's chances to survive into adulthood is dramatically increased. And as this slide shows, in the UK, the United States, Jamaica, and America, they're making strides in increasing that survival rate over the past 20 years, where before it was considered, and not to put it lightly, a death sentence to have sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease, a tale of two countries, or continents, excuse me. And I think this slide really shows it well, where you have the comparison of the Americas and Africa. Sickle cell disease has been recognized as a global public health problem by the United Nations and the World Health Organization. The burden of this disorder and other hemoglobin disorders is expected to increase in the coming decades because of two reasons. Because one of the reduction of infant mortality in many low-income countries, which is a wonderful thing, but also the increase in migration from high to low hemoglobin-esque frequency areas worldwide. This plot shows that in Nigeria, there are an estimated 8,186 babies born annually with SS disease, while in the United States, it's estimated that 2,843 are born annually with the disease. From this graphical plot, you can see that sickle cell anemia is common throughout much of sub-Saharan Africa, as I said before, affecting up to 3% of births in some parts of the continent, resulting in a very high rate of childhood mortality, range from 50% to 80% in some countries. So this remains a low priority for many health ministries, but we, as this coalition, are hoping to educate and increase that awareness and raise the importance of this. So here in the United States, what are some important facts and important things to keep in mind? Newborn screening, preventative practices, and comprehensive care has really shifted the survival and improved the lives of those living with sickle cell disease. Patients usually survive early childhood and have a wonderful survival and quality of life of that when they have this type of comprehensive care. Unfortunately, premature adult mortality is still in existence. And what we see is that life expectancy is about 43 years for females and 41 years for males. The quality of life is still compromised by an increasing number of complications. But as we evolve the science and know more about this disease process, we can hopefully help these individuals. Now, sickle cell disease in Africa, what we see is that more than 75% of the global burden of sickle cell disease occurs in sub-Saharan Africa. 1,000 children are born with SCD every day in Africa. And the majority of the estimated 400,000 infants born annually with sickle cell disease in Africa die before the age of 5 years. These are startling facts and statistics. And with the combined effort of multiple stakeholders that are involved in initiatives just like this one, we're hoping to shift these statistics. So overall, what is the current management of sickle cell disease? What is it looking like right now? Early screening is the key. Detection within the first 6 weeks is vital for survival, and we've seen the positive impact of that. And we're trying to make sure that that is in place globally. Life-saving interventions must be initiated early in life, such as and inclusive of penicillin prophylaxis, anti-malarial prophylaxis in endemic areas, immunizations, and regular checkups. Therapeutic treatment and disease management will be different from each individual, but when you're plugged into a good comprehensive care plan, as we stated in the prior slide, that can really change the trajectory and quality of your life. And as I started with saying at the beginning, education, education, education. With awareness and education, we can make so much change. And that change can lead to positive action and positive change and engagement. So we want to have more sickle cell trait screening, which we want for everyone, so that we can start that journey of healthier living early in life. We want awareness of the disease, which comes in so many different formats, such as this wonderful webinar that I'm blessed to be a part of today, and addressing the stigma, which is interlaced within the quality of care that's delivered for our patients, so needs to be looked at and addressed. And with that little bit of overview and backdrop on sickle cell disease, I want to end with a quote that crossed my path earlier today, and I feel is so important to share. And as we talk about awareness and education, and it's that science is not the truth. Science is finding the truth. And when science changes its opinion, it didn't lie to you. it learned more. And as a collective group, we're able to learn more and share that knowledge and make strides in sickle cell disease. And with that, I'd like to pass it back to Leslie. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joie Brewer. What an incredible, wholesome, insightful conversation about the history, about the context of where we are and where we go next. I think there is some truth in the conversation that this is really a silent issue, and we certainly need to do more to talk about it. And so, allow me to just thank you for your illuminating work around this, because the panelists we are about to hear from know quite well about what it means to live with it or to love people who live with sickle cell disease. And so the more that we can see people who are living and thriving with this disease, hopefully we can make those statistics that you mentioned something that we don't have to worry so much about, hopefully one day. Let me bring in some additional panelists to the conversation this afternoon. Ijama Azubuko is the founder of the Ruby Bell Foundation, and she is a sickle cell warrior. Ijama, thank you for joining us. Tosin Alu actually coined the term sickle cell warrior. And so we are grateful to see Tosin. She is also the founding president and CEO of Sickle Cell Warriors, Inc. And finally, we round out this dynamic group of ladies with Biba Tinga. She is the president and the executive director of the Sickle Cell Disease Association of Canada, and she is the parent of an adult living with sickle cell disease. Ladies, thank you for the opportunity to really talk with you and dig in a bit more about this crucial issue. Dr. Brewer just really gave us a comprehensive look at what sickle cell disease is, how it has changed, what we've learned about it. But Dr. Brewer, if you'd allow me just to come back to you a little bit more, when I hear about the statistics and about the state of things, I wonder, how many estimated carriers or people with sickle cell are there in the world, and how would we even determine if we have the trait?
Thank you for that question. So I think, with time and research, we're really getting to that number more and more, because I think, 10 years ago, if you asked that question, you'd get one number. 5 years ago, if you asked that question, you'd get another. And today, the number I'm going to give you is about 30 million that are just affected, 30 million worldwide that are affected by sickle cell disease. And it's a staggering number. It's a staggering number because they're affected in so many different ways. And we know that that worst iteration of that is a life-threatening situation. And with that, the best way that we can help individuals learn about this and see this early is newborn screening. And as I referenced earlier, it's one of the pillars in really starting the process in proper treatment young, as if we can get it within 6 weeks of age. It is law in the States here, and it is being done globally, but it can be done better in some countries and continents at a lower rate than others. But we're really hoping to be part of that charge and the initiative to make sure that every single country has newborn screening available. That'd be one thing, but then to also do it, because what we've even seen in the States is that it's part of newborn screening, it's in every state, but every state doesn't necessarily do it the way we want. So there's a whole charge between making sure that every state is held accountable, and then that charge now is going over to champions who are doing it globally. So newborn screening is the way, and if you can request it. You can go into your physician, you can go into your primary care doctor, any doctor, and request a newborn screening, which is a simple blood test, and they can do it for you. And if they're not the right person, make sure you challenge them to make sure that they provide the right person for you, so that you can get that test done, so that we all know our status. Because in knowing our status and knowing the true numbers, then we can see the differences in the science that it has. And like I said, science is always developing. What we didn't know 5 years ago, we know now. And in knowing that and to be able to provide that for everyone, then we have the right numbers. And worldwide, I want to reiterate and correct myself. I think I quoted the lower number. It's actually 100 million people worldwide. So hopefully that answers your question, Leslie. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a significant impact, and a lot of lives packed into those numbers, a lot of families packed into those numbers. I want to bring in Ijama, and Dr. Brewer just talked about when you find out you have sickle cell disease, and this is a disease that has touched you and some of your siblings. And so I wonder, what do you face every day? What are the challenges that you face navigating this disease?
I feel the biggest thing with sickle cell is the unpredictability of it. You never know day by day what may happen or when it may impact you. So I feel like that's one of the main issues that I come across. So being a career woman, having to go to work, having different things that I'm a part of, there may be times where I have to like sit and be like, okay, Jama, you need to, you know what I mean, take a step back. But sometimes when you're pushing, you may not really realize it until your body shuts down on its own for you. So that's some of the things that I feel, mainly the unpredictability.
Because you could wake up one day feeling like your full self, and the next day you may be in crisis.
Yeah, even in the next minute, like even with me sitting here, I could be sitting here talking to you, and then all of a sudden I start having pain in my leg or in my side or something. That's always a possibility. And so it's just a matter of being able to, because one of the big things too is like kind of understanding your triggers. But even with understanding the various triggers with sickle cell, there's really five main ones that people talk about, which would be stress, dehydration, extreme change in temperature, infection, and high altitude. And so, like knowing your body through the years, you get to know which ones trigger you the most, and trying to be able to like identify that a little bit. But sometimes you're not able to even really do that, and so you just have to be able to maintain and manage within the time.
You know, Tosin, I know this is a journey that you are on as well. And, you know, sometimes our body gives us whispers, but it sounds like with sickle cell disease, it literally roars. And so you came up with this term called sickle cell warrior. And I wonder why it was so important to reframe the dialogue around how you walk in the world with sickle cell and the kind of resources that you've helped to create to build community around this.
Thank you very much, Leslie, and hello everyone on the panel. I would say when I joined sickle cell advocacy, when I joined the front lines in 2005, something that really triggered me really bad as a patient in the hospital was being called a sickler. And it wasn't how it was said. It wasn't the way the word itself sounded. It was how it was said. And it was said with such derision, and I felt devalued and less than. And really the phrase that the nurse said was, let me give that sickler in room 4 her pain meds so I can go on my break. And my door happened to be open, and I heard that. And before the nurse came back from his break, I had written a sign, do not call me a sickler, call me a sickle cell warrior. Because it really is a daily battle. It's a daily battle, and you're constantly trying to find balance and moderation in everything you do. In every aspect of your life, there's a mental checklist running. Okay, did I pack a sweater? Am I hydrated? Did I do this? Did I do that? Even something as simple as planning a vacation, there's all these checks and balances that you have to do. And so it is getting up in the morning is like going into battle. And what I've noticed in the last 17 years is that reframing the name and has given a sense of respect to the patients and also a level of dignity to the patient nursing care relationship that wasn't there before. It also honored the struggles that we go through. And it warms my heart to know that, you know, there's a girl in Southern Africa that's never going to be called a sickler and have to deal with that negative connotation and negative bias. Another thing that was really evident was in 2005, people weren't really talking about sickle cell disease, that they had it. It was something we were all very told to be ashamed about and embarrassed about. Or if we had it, we were the only ones in our family and we were very isolated. So the internet and developing community online gave us peer support. And that was something that was very valuable because now I'm not alone. It's not just me and my family that has sickle cell. I'm connected with 26,000 people online. And so I can definitely find someone that's walking in my shoes or that has experienced the things that I'm going through.
It gave you hope.
Yes.
It gave you hope. You know, when I think about the numbers that Dr. Brewer shared with us, the staggering numbers about the global toll, and I think about how a child born in Africa could have a very different life expectancy than in other parts of the world. Biba, I'd love to ask you a bit more about how sickle cell disease is handled in your native Niger.
Well, good questions. I'm going to respond with two words: supportive care.
Mm.
Basic supportive care. When my son was born over 30 years ago, I remember the first thing they prescribed was folic acid that he was to take daily, and that's it. And we go home. And when he gets sick, we go to the hospital. Then they will give him, they will manage the pain with pain medication, which were not opioid, but maybe morphine, some codeine, and then hydrate, and if needed, blood transfusion. That's all they get. Mm-hmm. And guess what? I still go back often to Niger. Same thing to this day. So it's there is progress though. At the time when my son was born, we were handed a death sentence. But now there is hope, as you said. There is hope that I can see kids living and going beyond the age of 5. But you know what? Many of them are still dying under the age of 5 in sub-Saharan Africa because of the lack of treatment options, because also sometimes the parent cannot afford the care for them. So it's supportive care in most part of the world, unfortunately.
Do we know why sickle cell is more common in Africa, Biba?
I think Dr. BWHI explained it, right? Because sickle cell is more prevalent in people from African descent. Mm-hmm. So here is the thing. I will let Dr. BWHI come back and explain the medical part, but I will talk about the cultural aspect here.
That's exactly what I was hoping to get to.
And has a mom, has a caregiver. I was a young mom. I was what we consider a teen mom. I was a few months shy of my 19th birthday when my son was born. So it wasn't a choice. It wasn't a decision that I made to her. And I didn't know, and my son was born. And when I got the diagnosis, he was 7 months old. And I keep talking to all the parents, and I tell them I cannot describe anything more painful than to see your child in pain. The pain of sickle cell is just something that I can't describe. And to this day, my son is over 30 years old, and I see a grown-up man cry, because he's in pain. And we have good pain management because now we live in Canada, right? So the cultural aspect, I think, is just the reason why we have so many people, who are born, again, to this day, born with sickle cell disease. And make no mistake, we don't deny people the right to have kids. We don't also deny those who have sickle cell the right to be born. We are so grateful to have them around. But those who can make a decision have to get tested and then make, know their sickle cell status before having kids. Unfortunately, people leave it to God, the culture, playing the genetic lottery sometimes, saying that, well, they said, what, I will just have a child. My child will be healthy if God decides so. And I often tell them, well, he's giving you the ability to make a choice, to make sure that, you protect your child as a parent, to make the best decision ever. So to me, for Niger, for what I know, and for all the sub-Saharan African countries where I've been, I think it's the lack of awareness, and also the cultural aspect of the fact that we are brought into this culture, into this world, and people are expected to have kids. That's a community that is very important to them. And unfortunately, the education and the science is not following to tell them, how to do it without any risk.
Dr. Brewer, can you pick up a little bit, because there may be people listening who still want to know, what is it about being born in Africa that makes you more susceptible to sickle cell disease? We've heard Biba talk about the cultural implications and the role that may play. But what do we also know about the science and the most simplistic way to explain it?
So, and with the science, when we look historically, Africa is one of those places that was endemic with malaria and still is. It's common in malaria in Africa, malaria is. So we see it as sickle cell itself, the hemoglobin developed as a protective mechanism against the malaria in order to improve the survival of individuals that had or contracted malaria. And so that has maintained and persisted. And then with immigration and cross-cultural populations, you see that change and that mutation has migrated out of Africa. So that's why we see the higher rates and incidences within the African continent. It was supposed to be just a protective mechanism, but it's evolved to something much more than that, as we know today.
Wow. Ijama, I know you have lived with sickle cell for many years, and so you know about the impact in your own body and to your siblings, but you had an instance, a real transformative instance that brought you into advocacy and how you created your foundation, the Ruby Ball Foundation. Can you share a little bit more about that with us?
Yeah. So definitely, the thing that really brought me into advocacy is I had a friend by the name of Ebony Lanier, that was also living with sickle cell. Kind of how Tosin kind of explained is growing up, you don't really know a lot of people with this illness because it's a silent disease. Nobody wants to talk about it. And kind of how people said, being of African descent, it's something that's stigmatized, that's taboo. And so your family, they literally want to keep it within the family. So growing up, I didn't know anybody outside of myself and my siblings that had sickle cell until after college when I met Ebony. And so she ended up actually allowing me to better understand my bout with sickle cell and have a better understanding of certain things that I was dealing with, that I was going through. So it was good to have somebody like that in my corner that was around the same age as me. And so fast forward to 2017, we were talking about becoming better advocates in sickle cell. It was in September of Sickle Cell Awareness Month. And so we talked about what we could do in order to get out there. And unfortunately, the next month, she ended up passing away from complications due to her sickle cell. And so with that, I said, okay, I can't let this continue on and not be active and not, you know what I mean, become more of an advocate within this space. And so that's where the Ruby Ball was birthed. During that time, I actually was living out of the country. I was living in Gabon at the time when I decided to do this. So I was like, okay, how am I going to do this from a totally different continent? But I was able to connect with the Sickle Cell Disease Association of America. And I was able to put on this event in 2018. And so with me doing that, there was a very large response to it. And they were like, okay, what's next? What are you going to do? Like, you can't just stop now. And so that's where the Ruby Ball Foundation was birthed.
That's fantastic. And, you know, sometimes it takes us having a personal connection to something to fully understand the impact that it has, not just on us, but on those we love and people we don't even know yet because of what you have talked about around the silence. Tosin, I know you have worked to kind of take the veil off and remove this idea of silence. And you've chosen words to do that. You've chosen building community on social media to do that. I wonder, what stories have you been told? What have you learned through that journey of building community that stayed with you that might be worth sharing with other people who are just starting on this journey to understanding?
Ooh, that's a really good question, Leslie. I would say the first one is all of us are connected by this flaw in our DNA. And so I look at every single sickle cell warrior as a brother or sister because it's almost like we're in the same family. It's a painful family, but we're all in the same family. And so that camaraderie and that sense of support can translate into so many different arenas and to so many different initiatives. One of the key things that I notice in those that thrive with sickle cell disease is that they have other support, and it's not just their parents or just their siblings, but they have external support as well, their employers, their teachers, their friends. And so this whole finding your voice theme is very critical because that's how you gain support. People don't know what you're going through if you're just in your room suffering silently. And so it's okay to talk about it. And everyone has something that they struggle with. And raising the profile of sickle cell and just allowing people to feel comfortable talking about their condition, I would say, is another thing that has really changed in the last 15 years. And social media has done a lot to help with that, because it's no longer as stigmatized as it used to be. And you're finding your tribe. And not just in the general sickle cell community, but also in the categories of what you're going through. If you're going through reproductive issues, you can find groups that deal with reproductive issues. If you're going through like any area of your life, career issues, school issues, you can find people that you can relate to. One of the saddest things I would say is that I notice in countries like India or Nigeria, people tend to get discarded when they have sickle cell. It's almost like, I'm not going to invest money in this person's education because this child is going to die. So why bother sending them to school? Or I'm not going to tell people that we have sickle cell because it's going to ruin our marriage prospects for the whole family. That's something that happens in India quite often. So the stigma, it's not only external from the general public, it's also internal in your community. And so when you don't have that support, and yes, you can have a good relationship with your doctor and you can try to manage your condition on your own, but this is not something that someone can fight by themselves. You need community. And whether that community is in person, whether that community is through your family, through your church, or through online, it's important to find community.
You know, Biba, you found sort of your greatest calling probably outside of parenthood through this journey along sickle cell disease, right? From being in Niger to now being in Canada, and also being the head of an organization that is focused on sickle cell disease in Canada. We talked a bit about the experience of sickle cell disease in Africa. You are now in Canada. Can you talk to us about the differences between treatment, resources, stigma, all of that, where you are now?
Whew. That's a very good question. Like, that's the story of our life and our life journey. You know, when we moved to Canada, my son was about 15 years old, and when we arrived here, he had a growth delay of about 3 years old. So, and then he was in constant pain and crisis. You know, we were very often at the hospital. You know, so, and long stays and everything. So we got to Canada. The first thing they did is that they controlled the pain. Pain management was better. And every time he was crying, I was crying. And every time I was crying, the rest of the family was sad. So when he stopped crying, I stopped crying. And then life changed. So there was kind of a vague of hope. And then they took care of the growth delay. Very simply, blood transfusion for over a year, monthly blood transfusion, which they don't do in Africa. And I thought, that's it. He's going to be better here. Later on, a couple of years after, he went onto hydroxyurea. That's the only drug that we have for sickle cell treatment, which is not a sickle cell drug, but a cancer drug that they use for sickle cell. But over the course of all those years, as he was doing better, going to school and having a normal, young adult, teenage to young adult life, I realized that also was supportive care. That is supportive care, but maybe done with better tools, because they were using opioid, but those opioids that will control the pain better and faster have a side effect. They were using hydroxyurea, which was not available for him. But after a while, it stopped working. So now he's on blood exchange every 9 weeks. And it's been for the past 10 years. We know that can create other problems, organ damage. And that's the state of sickle cell in Canada. For over 40 years, that's when I realized that there's the exact something: antibiotics, painkillers, blood. And that's what they have in Africa. But the tools are different. And I think the reason why people are having a better quality of life now here, it's because here they are able to treat the chronic complications better than in Africa. if you have bone necrosis, if you have leg ulcers, you name it, warriors, help me here. they can treat them better because they have the proper tool. The medicine is more advanced, while people will not be, have access to those cares. So that's why I start advocating. That's when I realized that I can just sit at home and say that, I'm going to take care of this child. More has to be done. We need resources allocated to sickle cell. We need more research to be done in Canada. For instance, now we have 3 new drugs specifically dedicated for sickle cell disease treatment, that have been approved by the US FDA. They are not available in Canada yet. And we are just the next door neighbor. So we're working with advocating for that. So if you ask me, what's the difference? I will say better tools, maybe more experience here, and but it's still supportive care.
Supportive care is everything.
Yes.
Wow. Wow.
But there is, a hope again. A lot of research is being done. Clinical trials are on, but it takes a long time. It takes time.
It does take time. Dr. Brewer, I wonder, and you all may have already answered this question with your experiences, but for the layperson who maybe doesn't know this, does sickle cell disease present the same in each person who walks with it? That is to say, when I know that I was born with it, would I be in crisis pretty soon after it, or could I be an adult when I learn about the impact of sickle cell disease on my life?
So the one thing that's the most glaring is that sickle cell disease represents itself differently in every single individual. Though I think there are commonalities that I can relate to as a fellow warrior with Ijeoma, and commonalities that I can, reference with Tosin that we've had in common, our paths are very different. And with that, it presents very, very different clinically for different individuals. I mean, we know that some of the earliest symptoms can appear and show up as early as 5 months of age. And that, can you imagine a mother coming to the hospital with her infant and not, if there was no newborn screen, not knowing what might be going on, or then knowing, and then the potential complication? It's such a daunting experience. But the one thing we do know, I think Ijeoma referenced how unpredictable this disease is. I think the same is that we know that sickle cell disease is an umbrella term for many different presentations with different warriors that have the disease process.
That's really fascinating, because there may be people listening today who may not be fully aware that this is a journey that they are going to be on at some point. And so the fact that everybody knows that it can present differently in the body, I think is really, really important to share.
And Leslie, I would actually even ask, even for one individual, decades within their own lives can present so differently. I mean, some warriors, I applaud it when I can stand up and someone can say, I haven't experienced any complications or very little for the past 5 years. And then you may not see them for a while, and that completely changes. So not only is it different per periods of time in different individuals, but even sometimes within the own individual. And I just wanted to add that, only because sometimes people think if it's already silent and I'm not experiencing anything, then that should mean that I don't have, but that's not necessarily so. And it can change its face within each individual over time. And I think, as Vertexian, as individuals that champion this disease process, we always want people to be aware of that and always observant and looking for those answers.
Dr. Brewer, you just mentioned that you may be experiencing sickle cell disease one way and then things might change. Ijeoma, I know we talked about this before the webinar, and you said you hadn't really had a crisis since before the pandemic, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But now, even in your work, can you tell in your body when you're heading in that path? Is there something that happens to you where you go, uh-oh, I think something's happening here?
Oh yeah, there's times you can tell. I know one of the things with a lot of people with sickle cell, they have jaundice in the eyes. And so if you see that your eyes are starting to get a little bit more yellow than normal, that's a way that some people are able to tell that they may be going into crisis. The way that I talked about in terms of dehydration. And so it's like when you feel your body starting to feel kind of dehydrated, or you feel yourself starting to feel a little bit more fatigued than normal. And so like that's why it's good in terms of having places where you can go and get like hydration treatments or different things like that to try to get in front of it. But that's not always the case in terms of it being helpful, because again, it goes back to the unpredictability. You can think, okay, I'm trying to get in front of this, and then something happens that totally takes you off the charge. Kind of even going back to what Dr. Margie was saying, how I told you that I have two other siblings. I have a twin brother and a younger sister that also have sickle cell. My twin brother, when we were growing up, like you wouldn't, to him, he didn't have sickle cell. You know what I mean? And so it was one of those things. He didn't have to go to hospital as much as me and my sister did. But now as an adult, he's had more complications. Like he's had a stroke. There's different things that have happened to him more after the age of 30, that now he has to be more cognizant of the things that he does, and he needs to pay more attention to his body. But these are things that was never an issue for him before. Like if he had a crisis, he'll be like, oh, I have a Charlie horse, and try to go on about his business. But now it's not the case. And so that's one of the things that trying to like be focused and understanding and knowing, like even with you knowing your body, you just have to always be prepared.
I wonder, Tosin, you probably have some thoughts about that as well. And also I wonder what advice you might give to, I just heard Ijama talk about really listening to your body, but for people who might be caretakers or might be friends of someone who has sickle cell, how do you help them? How are you an ally to them on the journey?
This question is often frequently asked, and we actually did a video about it on our YouTube page, because it's such a great question. And you help just by being present and being a witness to what they're going through, allowing them to share what they feel comfortable sharing with, and then being there to drive them to the hospital, drive them to doctor's appointments, tangible things like that. But there are also intangible things like just, for example, if the pain is so ridiculous for me, I can notice, I don't even notice that I'm in pain sometimes, because I'm used to being in pain all the time. And then it's my friend or my husband or someone that knows me well. Hey, your voice is changing. How's your hydration? How's your pain today? And then I actually think about it. Oh yeah, I'm actually in pain. So even just being aware of that person's normal habits, and when they're doing something, because for example, when we feel well as a warrior, we feel like we can conquer the world. And it's just like, I want to do everything I can. I want to pack everything I can into these 2 days that I'm feeling well. And then we overexert ourselves. So it's good to have someone that's saying, hey, take it easy there, get some rest, make sure you're chilling. Like you don't have to do everything today. And just being almost like a coach, a mentor, a teacher. My husband, he researches things for me, and because he knows that I don't have the time or the energy, he'll pre-do the research and then just send me a text. Hey, this is what you need to know about this article, because that's just easier for him to do than it is for me to do, because I don't have the energy. And so just little things like that.
How do you put the mask over you, Tosin? Because you're running an organization, you're running a huge community. People are constantly leaning on you for support. I sure hope that today is a good day for all of you who are walking with sickle cell disease and that you're feeling good in your bodies. But the honest truth is you might be sitting here in pain right now. So how do you put the mask on yourself, even as you work to advocate on behalf of others? I think that's important for people listening today to hear from all of you about that particular thing.
Yeah, for me, I look at it in that I wear many hats. And my first hat is I'm a person and I'm a sickle cell warrior. So if I am not feeling well, then all the other hats I'm not going to put on that day until the day that I'm feeling at least 50% well. Then I can grab another hat of like, okay, I'll do my advocacy today, or I'll do my education today. As someone who has the disease and also someone that's a caregiver, it's very important that you also take care of yourself. And I think this is something that often gets missed, because we often want to help people so much, but then we deplete our own selves. So you have to take that time for yourself. Make sure you're resting properly. Make sure you're just eating properly. Just the basic health principles are very critical. And knowing when to ask for help, that's a hard one. That's a very hard one for a lot of us. But knowing when to ask for help and knowing when to say, hey, I can't do it today. Can we push it to another day? And people are very understanding. But for some reason in our society, we're told that we have to do it all. It's impossible to be a superwoman. It's impossible. I tried. It's impossible.
Yeah, and just even piggybacking off of what Tosin said about the whole mental health thing, I feel like that's the biggest thing. Is like you have to be a whole you first before you can help anybody else. And so it's like you have to truly understand that. And so it's been a learning process through growth and through age to see that and just transitioning from that perspective. And one of the things that I always say is that seeing sickle cell from a place of strength as opposed to weakness. A lot of people want to see it as this is something that's bringing me down or that's causing me pain, but it's the way that you see it. So just changing your thought process and the way that you see things and knowing that this is a part of my strength and this is a part of what makes me who I am. And so that in itself pushes you to be able to go day by day, to be able to do the things that you've been destined and called to do.
Biba, is that what you tell your constituency in Canada? Because you've seen all sides of this as well, making sure you take care of yourself as you've been taking care of your son and you're taking care of others through the advocacy that you do. What are the pearls of wisdom that you share with the people that you help in Canada?
Well, one of the things that I start, talking more and then sharing about, I said, for every warrior you see standing, think about the parents, the moms, the dad, the family, because sickle cell is a family disease. It affects one person, it affects the entire family. You see how they describe it's unpredictable, it's painful, it's debilitating, complication. You never know when you go to the ER if you're going to come back the same night or in a month. So imagine your work. So the emotional toll that it takes, on you and your family members, and also financial and physical, because you're exhausted after 2 weeks in the hospital, the back and forth driving and taking care of the rest of the families. So of course, I tell people that take care of yourself and make sure that, you have a strong support system. Know when to ask for help, share, tell people when you need help and tell them what you need so that they can help you better. Because people can assume, well, if I don't hear from him, that means, he's fine. No, check on your friends who have sickle cell, or even the parents, or even the husband. Like Tosin is describing her husband, I'm sure sometimes he needs also a shoulder to lean on, because he has the rest of the house on his shoulder to carry when you're not well. So I tell them the same thing. And we are a community where we just recently have started the conversation about mental health. But imagine just living with the anxiety and the stress of losing your child. Every crisis is scary. Every crisis, you are on your knees because you don't know what's going to happen. So imagine the toll it takes on you after, I've been dealing with this for 34 years now. And at some point, I was just emotionally drained. I was just tired. And I'm so happy that now the siblings are growing up. And sometimes when my son calls and says, I don't feel well, the brother says, I'm going to go bring him here. So we pick him up, bring him to the house, and everybody is helping. And I'm not driving anymore. I don't pick him up if he has to go to the hospital, his brother. Then I'm like, is it fair or not for them? But you know what? We're family. And that's what we do. So everybody has to come together, take care of each other. And we need to seek help with professional if we need it. Let's talk about it. Let's have the conversation. It's a chronic illness. It's a genetic illness. It's not your fault. The guilt, many parents are depressed and, because just they feel so guilty for that. But it's a genetic condition. So what can you do about it? So yes, I talk to them and I tell them, you know what? Educate yourself first. If you don't educate yourself, you cannot advocate for yourself or for your child. Know the disease, know the system, know what has to be done. And when you can, get some rest or lie on your friend or family who wants to help, and create a strong support network around you, because you're going to need it, because it's a chronic disease. So you're going to need it for the rest of your life. So have strong allies. We need allies and the allyship that we're looking for is not those who are just called themselves allies because they show up once in a while. It's those who stand with us, advocate with us to make sure that we get the resources that we need to get the best care possible and have a better quality of life.
And I
Well,
want to say one
Daviba.
last thing before we go. Give blood. Like that's something that's very,
That's
very important
allyship.
and that's helpful for people living with self. And so,
That's
yeah, that's why I
allyship.
wanted to tie back with you in the allyship that giving blood is one of the ways that you can assist and help individuals living with sickle cell disease. Because as Biba said, her son having to get these transfusions, you know what I mean, multiple times within the month, it's very important.
Well, Biba and Ijama and Dr. Brewer and Tosin, thank you so much for sharing your time, for sharing your heart, for sharing your advocacy. I hope that this has been time well spent for all of you and that your walk going forward is filled with more love than pain, and that the impact that you have continues to reverberate over and over and over again. So to all of you who joined us this afternoon, we all extend a huge debt of gratitude to our speakers for spending their time with us with authenticity and with candor and sharing as we uplift the voices of sickle cell disease patients of color. We hosted this event, obviously, to commemorate World Sickle Cell Day 2022, which, of course, is this Sunday, June 19th. And, of course, the insights shared today will truly continue to help engage and support and educate members of the sickle cell community, as well as the general public, about this rare disease. And you heard the women here talk about you can be an ally by helping to educate, by standing in the light with them, by donating blood, by doing your part. So thank you to the Rare Disease Diversity Coalition for your work in helping to address these health inequities for rare disease patients of color. And to find out more about the Rare Disease Diversity Coalition, you can go to www.rarediseasediversity.org. On behalf of all of us, thank you for tuning in this afternoon and have a great afternoon.